The morning started like any other November day. People went to work. Children walked to school. Coffee shops filled with customers who complained about the cold weather and checked their phones for news. Nobody looked up at the sky. Nobody saw what was coming. Commander Lisa Hartwell was eating breakfast in the cafeteria of the Orbital Defense Station, vigilant when the alarms started screaming. She dropped her fork and ran to the bridge, her boots pounding against the metal floor. By the time she reached her station, the tactical displays were covered with red dots. Hundreds of them, then thousands. The Korath Dominion had arrived. Lisa had studied the Korathan Military Academy. Everyone had. They were one of the most powerful species in the galaxy, rulers of over 1,000 star systems. Their ships were fast, their weapons were deadly, and they had been conquering other species for longer than humans had been building cities. The military instructors always said the same thing, if the Korath ever came to Earth. Pray they come in peace. They did not come in peace. Admiral Kevin Cole took command of the defense from Luna Base, the military headquarters on the moon. He was a calm man, known for keeping his head in difficult situations. But when he saw the size of the Korath fleet, even he went pale. The aliens had brought enough ships to conquer a dozen worlds. Earth had maybe 200 vessels capable of fighting in space. The battle began at noon. Earth time, Lisa watched from the vigilant as human ships rushed to meet the enemy. The first wave of defenders was destroyed in minutes. Korath weapons cut through human shields like they were made of paper. Explosions lit up the darkness of space, each one marking the death of a ship and everyone aboard. But the humans kept fighting. For 3 days, Earth threw everything it had at the invaders. Old ships that should have been retired were pulled from storage and sent into battle. Civilian vessels were armed with whatever weapons could be attached to their hulls. Pilots flew mission after mission, sleeping only when their bodies refused to stay awake any longer. Lisa flew 7 combat missions in those 3 days. She destroyed 4 Korath fighters and damaged a cruiser. She watched her wingman explode when a plasma bolt hit his cockpit. She landed her damaged ship on the Vigilant, climbed out, immediately got into another one. None of it was enough. On the 4th day, the orbital stations began to fall. Lisa was on the Vigilant when the Korath finally targeted it. The first hit knocked out their shields. The second destroyed the main engine. The third tore the station in half. Lisa made it to an escape pod. Most of her crew did not. She floated in space for 6 hours, watching the battle through a tiny window. By the time a rescue ship found her, Earth's orbital defenses were gone. The Korath controlled the space above the planet, and then they began to bomb. They targeted military bases first, then government buildings, then cities. Dr. Samuel Grant was in his underground laboratory in Colorado when Denver died. He felt the ground shake and heard a sound like thunder that did not stop. When he finally made it to the surface 3 days later, the city was gone. In its place was a crater filled with ash and melted glass. Samuel was a xenolinguist, a scientist who studied alien languages. He had spent 20 years learning to understand the few Korath transmissions that humanity had intercepted. He knew their words for war, conquest, and victory. He knew their word for humans too. It translated roughly as useful animals. The Korath landed their troops on the 7th day. By then, there was little resistance left. The armies of Earth had been shattered by orbital bombardment. The surviving soldiers fought in the ruins of their cities, using whatever weapons they could find. They killed thousands of Korath warriors. The aliens killed millions of humans in return. 12 cities burned before the Dominion declared the conquest complete. New York, London, Tokyo, Moscow, and 8 others were reduced to ash and rubble. 800 million people died in the first week of the invasion. The survivors hid in bunkers, basements, and caves. Listening to the alien ships pass overhead, Samuel was captured on the 10th day. Korath soldiers found his laboratory and dragged him out into the daylight. They scanned his files and found his research on their language. An officer looked at him with 4 cold eyes and said words that Samuel understood perfectly. "You will serve us now." They took him to what remained of Geneva, Where the Korath were setting up their administrative center for Earth, he was given a small room, enough food to survive, and a simple job. He would translate human documents for his new masters. He would help them process the conquered population. He would be a good, useful animal. Samuel agreed to everything they asked. He bowed his head and spoke softly and did his work without complaint. The Korath officers barely noticed him after the first few weeks. He was just another human servant. He was broken and obedient like all the rest. But Samuel was not broken. Every night, alone in his small room, he wrote down everything he learned. The names of Korath officers, the locations of their bases, the schedules of their supply ships, the technical words they used when they thought no human was listening. He memorized their military ranks, their command structure, their codes and protocols. He could not fight them with weapons. He was not a soldier. But information was a weapon too, and Samuel was building an arsenal. Across the planet, others were doing the same. In the flooded ruins of New York, a woman named Patricia Dawson pretended to run a salvage operation while actually building a spy network. In the mountains of Montana, an engineer named Daniel Kim gathered other survivors and began studying every piece of Korath. Technology, they could. Steel. Lisa Hartwell had survived her escape. Podden made it back to Earth. She hid in the wilderness of Canada, slowly gathering other military survivors around her. They had no ships, no heavy weapons, and no way to fight the alien fleet in orbit. But they trained anyway, preparing for a day that might never come. The Korath looked at their new conquest and saw only what they expected to see. A primitive species easily defeated, now properly subdued. The humans worked in their factories, cleaned their buildings, and served their meals. They caused no trouble. They made no demands. The Dominion had conquered hundreds of species. They all reacted the same way. First resistance, then defeat, then acceptance. The humans were following the pattern perfectly. What the Korath did not understand was that silence was not the same as surrender. Behind the bowed heads and quiet voices, something was growing. In hidden rooms and secret meetings, humans were planning, learning, and waiting. The occupation had begun. Earth had fallen silent, but the silence was a lie. 7 years passed under Korath rule. The aliens changed Earth in ways that would have seemed impossible before the invasion. They built towering structures in the ruins of human cities. Ugly gray buildings that served as administrative centers and military bases. They dug mines in places that humans had considered protected wilderness. They put collars on millions of people and sent them to work in factories that produced goods for the Dominion. The Korath did not hate humans. That would have required them to think of humans as equals. Instead, they simply did not care. A human life meant nothing more to them than the life of an insect. They killed when it was convenient and ignored suffering when it was not worth their attention. Patricia Dawson learned to use this arrogance. Her salvage operation in New York had grown over the years. The Korath allowed humans to clean up the ruins of their own cities, while sorting through rubble for materials that could be recycled. It was dirty, dangerous work, and the aliens considered it beneath their notice. They never wondered why Patricia's workers always seemed to find the most valuable salvage. They never asked why broken Korath. Equipment kept disappearing from her. Warehouses. Patricia had built a network that stretched across the entire eastern coast of what had once been the United States. Every piece of alien technology that passed through her hands was secretly scanned and studied. The data was copied onto hidden drives and smuggled to resistance cells in a dozen different locations. She had contacts in every major labor camp, informants in Korath administrative offices, and spies on alien ships. The Dominion thought she was running a garbage collection service. They had no idea she was running a war. In Geneva, Samuel Grant had become invisible. 7 years of quiet obedience had made him part of the furniture. Korath officers spoke freely in front of him, discussing military operations and political matters as if he were not there. They had forgotten that he understood every word. His reports went out every night, through a communication system that the aliens had never detected. Human engineers had built it using Korath components, hiding the signal inside the normal electronic noise of the occupation. The information Samuel provided had saved thousands of lives. Resistance fighters knew when raids were coming. Smugglers knew which routes were safe. Scientists knew what alien technologies to focus on. But Samuel's greatest contribution was not information. It was hope. Every message he sent included the same closing words. We are learning. We are growing. The day will come in the mountains of Montana. Daniel Kim was proving those words true. The former Air Force engineer had spent the first 2 years of the occupation just trying to survive. He and a small group of refugees had hidden in an abandoned mine, scraping together enough food and water to stay alive. It was during the 3rd year that they found the crashed Korath scout ship. The alien pilot was dead, killed in the crash. The ship was badly damaged but not destroyed. Daniel spent 6 months taking it apart, piece by piece, studying every component, trying to understand how it worked. The Korath technology was centuries ahead of anything humans had built. Their energy systems were more efficient. Their materials were stronger. Their computers were faster, but they were not magic. They followed the same laws of physics that governed human technology. They could be understood. They could be copied. They could be improved. The first human-built faster-than-light drive was ugly. It was a mess of salvaged Korath parts and human engineering, held together with welding and prayers. Daniel tested it in the deepest part of the mine, far from any alien sensors. When he activated it, the device shook violently, produced a sound like screaming metal, and then did something impossible. It bent space. The test object, a simple metal sphere, vanished from one end of the mine and appeared at the other end instantly. Daniel stared at it for a long time. Then he sat down on the floor and cried. Humans could travel faster than light. They could build starships. They could reach the stars. For the first time since the invasion, Daniel allowed himself to believe that they might actually win. He called his invention the Spite Drive. The name spread through the resistance networks like fire. Soon, every hidden laboratory and secret workshop was working on their own version. Human engineers improved the design, made it smaller, made it more stable. Within 2 years, they had built something better than the Korath original. Lisa Hartwell received her first Spite Drive in the 5th year of the occupation. By then, she'd gathered nearly 1,000 military survivors in the Canadian wilderness. They had weapons stolen from Korath bases, vehicles salvaged from hidden military depots, and training facilities hidden in caves and bunkers. What they did not have was a way to fight the alien fleet that still orbited Earth. The Spite Drive changed everything. Lisa's engineers installed it in a small transport ship, one of the few human vessels that had survived the invasion by hiding in an underwater base. The ship was old and slow, not designed for combat, but it could now travel between planets in hours instead of months. They made their first raid on a Korath supply station near Mars. The aliens never saw them coming. Human soldiers boarded the station, killed the small garrison, and stole everything they could carry. Weapons, fuel, food, and most importantly, more Korath technology to study. The Dominion assumed the attack was the work of alien pirates. They increased security on their larger bases, but did not bother protecting the smaller ones. It was exactly the response Lisa had hoped for. Over the next 2 years, human raiders struck dozens of targets across the solar system. They grew bolder with each success, taking bigger risks for bigger rewards. They captured Korath ships and turned them against their former owners. They freed human prisoners and recruited them into the growing resistance. The aliens began to notice. Reports reached the Dominion High Command about unusual activity in the human system, but Earth was a minor conquest, barely worth attention. The Korath had other concerns, other wars to fight, other species to subdue. They left a skeleton fleet in orbit and assumed it would be enough. They were wrong in hidden shipyards on Earth. The Moon and Mars humanity was building a fleet. The ships were not pretty. They were angular and rough, built for function rather than appearance. But they were fast, they were armed, and they were filled with people who had spent 7 years waiting for the chance to fight back. Patricia coordinated the final. Preparations from New York. Samuel provided the intelligence. Needed to choose the perfect moment. Daniel supplied the technology that made it all possible. Lisa trained the crews and planned the battles. On a cold morning in November, exactly 7 years after the invasion began, Patricia sent a single coded message across every resistance network on Earth. The message was simple. It was only one word. Now the whispers in the dark had become a roar. The uprising had begun. The uprising began at dawn, across 6 continents. In hundreds of cities and thousands of small towns, humans attacked their occupiers. The Korath had controlled Earth for 7 years. In the space of a single morning, they lost control completely. Patricia watched the first explosions from the roof of her warehouse in New York, the Korath's administrative building. A gray tower that had cast its shadow over the ruined city for half a decade was burning. Resistance fighters had planted explosives in the foundations the night before, disguised as routine maintenance workers. The aliens had never suspected a thing. Similar scenes played out everywhere. In London, human workers in a Korath factory sealed the doors and set fire to the machines. In Tokyo, resistance cells attacked the garrison headquarters with weapons stolen over years of patient planning. In Cairo, in Sydney, in Sao Paulo, and in 100 other places, humans rose up against their conquerors. The Korath were caught completely off guard. Their intelligence services had detected no warning signs. Their collaborators had reported nothing unusual. The humans had seemed completely broken, utterly defeated, totally obedient. Until they were not in Geneva. Samuel Grant walked into the Central Command building for the last time. The guards knew his face. They had seen him every day for 7 years. They did not search him. They did not ask what he was carrying. They simply nodded and let him pass. Samuel took the elevator to the top floor, where the senior Korath administrators worked. His hands were steady as he entered the main control room. A dozen alien officers looked up, annoyed by the interruption. One of them opened his mouth to order Samuel back to his duties. He never finished the sentence. The electromagnetic pulse device was small, designed by human engineers using stolen Korath technology. When Samuel activated it, every electronic system in the building died instantly. Lights went out. Computers crashed. Security doors unlocked. Communication systems fell silent. Samuel stood in the sudden darkness and smiled. Seconds later, resistance fighters poured into the building through every entrance. They moved fast and hit hard, using the confusion to overwhelm guards who could not call for backup. Samuel had mapped every room, every corridor, and every security station over 7 years of patient observation. The fighters knew exactly where to go and exactly what to do. The Korath European headquarters fell in less than 2 hours. By noon, human forces controlled every major administrative center on the planet. The occupation that had seemed unbreakable had collapsed like a house of cards. But the battle for the surface was only the beginning. The real fight was about to start in space. Lisa Hartwell stood on the bridge of humanity's first true warship. They had named it the Defiance, and it had taken 5 years to build. The ship was not elegant. It looked like what it was, a weapon forged from desperation and anger. Its hull was made from salvaged Korath armor. Its engines used the spite drive technology that Daniel Kim had invented. Its weapons were a mix of human and alien designs, chosen for maximum destructive power. Around the Defiance, 47 other human ships waited in formation. They had launched from hidden bases across the solar system, gathering at a point far from any Korath sensors. It was the largest human fleet since the invasion, and it was about to do something that the Dominion thought impossible. The Korath orbital fleet numbered over 400 ships. They were crewed by experienced warriors who had fought in dozens of campaigns. They had better weapons, better shields, and better training. By every measure that mattered, they should have won easily. Lisa gave the order to attack anyway. The human fleet emerged from faster-than-light travel directly in the middle of the Korath formation. The aliens had never seen anything move so fast or appear so suddenly. Their sensors screamed warnings that made no sense. Their commanders shouted orders that contradicted each other. Their ships tried to turn and face the threat. But they were too slow. The Defiance fired first. Lisa had spent years studying Korath's ship designs, learning their weaknesses, identifying the points where their armor was thinnest. She knew exactly where to aim. The first volley from the human fleet destroyed 23 alien vessels before they could raise their shields. The battle became chaos. Human ships darted through the Korath formation, too fast to track, too unpredictable to target. They attacked from every direction, fired their weapons, and vanished before the aliens could respond. The Korath tried to organize their defense, but their communications were being jammed by signals they could not block. Daniel Kim had made sure of that. The jamming technology was his latest invention, designed specifically to disrupt Korath systems. It worked perfectly. The fighting lasted 6 hours. At first, the Korath had the advantage of numbers. They destroyed human ships with their superior firepower, each loss a tragedy that Lisa felt like a physical wound. But the humans did not retreat. They did not surrender. They kept attacking, kept fighting, kept dying, till the balance finally shifted. The turning point came when the Defiance closed to point-blank range with the Korath flagship. Lisa could see the alien ship through her viewport, a massive vessel covered in weapons that could destro. Why a city? Its shields were failing, damaged by repeated attacks from human fighters. Its engines were crippled, struck by precision strikes that Daniel had calculated months before. Lisa gave the order to fire everything. The Korath flagship broke apart in a ball of white fire. Its commander, a senior admiral who had helped plan the original invasion of Earth, died without understanding how mere humans had defeated him. With their flagship gone, the remaining Korath ships lost coordination. Some tried to flee toward the edge of the solar system. Some tried to surrender. Some kept fighting until they were destroyed. By the time the battle ended, less than 50 alien vessels remained, and they were running as fast as their damaged engines could carry them. The skies above Earth were clear. Lisa sat in her command chair and looked at the planet below. She could see the continents, the oceans, and the scars where cities had once stood. She could see the smoke from the uprising still rising from 100 different places. She could see her home, for the first time in 7 years. No alien ships blocked her view. The crew of the Defiance was silent. Some were crying, some were laughing. Most simply stared at the screens showing the retreating enemy, unable to believe what they had accomplished. Patricia's voice came through the communication system, relayed from the surface. The occupation forces are surrendering everywhere. We won, Lisa. We actually won. Lisa wanted to celebrate. She wanted to cheer and shout and tell her crew that they had achieved the impossible. But she knew the truth. The Korath would return. They would bring more ships, more soldiers, and more weapons. Today's victory was only the beginning of a much longer war, but it was still a victory. Lisa keyed the communication system to broadcast on every frequency, making sure the retreating Korath ships could hear her message. She wanted them to carry it back to the Dominion. She wanted the entire galaxy to know what had happened. Earth speaks, she said simply, and we will not be silenced again. The message spread across the stars. The Korath response came 8 months later. Hi, Admiral. Veth stood on the bridge of his command ship and looked at the fleet he had assembled. 12,000 warships stretched across space as far as his sensors could detect. It was the largest military force the Dominion had gathered in over a century. It was enough firepower to destroy a dozen worlds. Veth had led the original invasion of Earth. The planet's rebellion had embarrassed him, damaged his reputation, and cost him political allies within the Dominion. He had requested this command personally, promising the Council that he would end the human problem permanently. He intended to keep that promise. The fleet jumped faster than light travel, crossing the vast distance between Dominion space and the Sol system in a matter of days. Veth used the time to review his plans. He would surround Earth, destroy its defenses, and then bombard the surface until nothing remained alive. The humans had proven too dangerous to enslave. They would be exterminated instead. His fleet emerged from FTL, at the edge of human space, and immediately began scanning for threats. What the sensors showed made no sense. There were ships everywhere. Not just human ships, though. There were hundreds of those. Veth's tactical officers identified vessels from a dozen different species. Threll attack craft, small and fast, designed for swarming tactics. Then transport ships converted to carry weapons that the Korath had never seen before. Calyx trading vessels, their cargo holds now filled with soldiers and supplies. And at the center of the formation, surrounded by escorts, the human fleet that had humiliated the Dominion 8 months ago. Veth stared at the display for a long moment. This was impossible. The Threll were a conquered people, their homeworld stripped of resources generations ago. The Ven were slaves, working in Korath factories across 100 systems. The Calyx were merchants, too weak and too scattered to threaten anyone. How had the humans gathered them all here? Patricia Dawson could have told him. She had spent the 8 months since the uprising reaching out to every species that the Korath had wronged. It had not been difficult. The Dominion had made many enemies over the centuries. Most of those enemies had been too weak to fight back alone. But they were not alone anymore. The Threll had suffered the most at Korath hands. Their world had been beautiful once, covered in vast forests that their civilization had tended for thousands of years. The Dominion had burned those forests and dug mines in their place. When the resources ran out, they had abandoned the Threll to starve on their ruined planet. Patricia had found them and offered something simple: revenge and a chance to rebuild. The Ven had been slaves for so long that most of them had forgotten what freedom meant. They worked in Korath factories, building the weapons and ships that kept the Dominion powerful. They were treated like machines, used until they broke and then replaced. Patricia had offered them something they had stopped believing was possible: the chance to fight for themselves. The Calyx had watched the Korath destroy their competitors through military force rather than fair trade. Their merchant empire had shrunk with each passing decade as the Dominion expanded. They had learned to survive by being useful, by staying quiet, by never attracting attention. Patricia had offered them information. Routes the Korath did not patrol. Weaknesses in Dominion defenses. And most importantly, detailed maps of every supply line that kept the Korath war machine running. None of these species had mighty fleets. None of them could challenge the Dominion directly. But together, supporting humanity's effort, it became something dangerous. Hi, Admiral, Veth learned. This lesson quickly. His fleet's navigation systems began to fail within hours of entering human space. A virus, designed by Threll programmers who had spent their lives maintaining Korath computer networks, had infected the Dominion ships through their own communication protocols. Ships drifted off course. Weapons systems malfunctioned. Shield generators flickered and died, while Vith's engineers struggled to fix the problems. Supply lines came under attack. Calyx intelligence had identified the routes his support ships would use. Human raiders, using the spite drive to appear and disappear without warning, destroyed tanker after tanker. The great Korath fleet began to run short of fuel and ammunition before firing a single shot. And then the Ven struck. They had been infiltrating Korath crew quarters for generations, working as servants and laborers on military vessels. They were invisible, beneath notice, trusted because they had never caused trouble. On a signal from Patricia, thousands of Ven workers across the Dominion fleet acted simultaneously. Some sabotaged critical systems. Some opened airlocks in sections where officers slept. Some simply walked away from their posts at the worst possible moment, leaving gaps in the Korath, fences that human ships were waiting to exploit. The battle that followed was brutal. Admiral Kevel commanded the human forces from the bridge of the Defiance. Lisa Hartwell flew at his side, leading the attack squadrons that struck at Korath weak points. Daniel Kim monitored the jamming systems that kept the enemy confused and uncoordinated. Samuel Grant listened to Korath communications, relaying their plans to human commanders almost as quickly as they were made. The Dominion fleet was still enormous. It still had more ships, more weapons, and more firepower than the Coalition arrayed against it. But it was fighting blind. Its systems corrupted, its supplies dwindling, and its crews uncertain who they could trust. The humans and their allies fought. For 3 days, by the end of the first day, the Korath had lost over 2,000 ships, By the end of the second, their formation had broken into scattered groups, each trying to survive independently. By the end of the third, High Admiral Veth's command ship was surrounded by human vessels. Its shields down, its weapons destroyed, and its engines dead. Veth refused to surrender. He ordered his remaining crew to fight to the last, to die with honor rather than submit to creatures he still considered inferior. His officers obeyed without question. They had been raised to believe that the Koroth were the masters of the galaxy. They could not accept any other reality. Lisa led the final assault on the flagship personally. Her ship punched through the weakened hull and landed in the main hangar. She walked through the burning corridors with a rifle in her hands. Stepping over the bodies of Koroth warriors who had tried to stop her, she found Veth on the bridge. Standing alone among the ruins of his command, his officers were dead. His ship was dying. His fleet was destroyed. He looked at Lisa with the same contempt he had shown humans 7 years ago when he had watched their cities burn. "You have won nothing," he said in his own language, not realizing she had learned to understand it. "The Dominion will send another fleet. And another. We will never stop until your species is extinct." Lisa did not respond with words. She raised her weapon and fired. The battle of the outer reaches was over. The Koroth had suffered their worst defeat in 300 years. And the galaxy had been watching. Within days, messages began arriving from across known space. Species who had feared the Dominion saw what humanity had accomplished. They saw that the Koroth could be beaten. They saw that resistance was possible. Patricia answered every message with the same invitation. "Come join us. Help us build something new. The age of the Dominion is ending, and the age of the free peoples is about to begin." The galaxy was listening, and for the first time in centuries, they heard something other than the voice of their conquerors. The Galactic Assembly met on a station at the center of known space. It was an ancient place. Built by species long forgotten, maintained by agreement among the powers that had risen since. For 6,000 years, the great civilizations of the galaxy had gathered here to discuss trade and territory, to settle disputes without war, and to decide the fate of younger species who sought recognition. The Koroth had dominated these gatherings for centuries. Their representatives sat in the highest seats. Their voices carried the most weight, and their demands were rarely refused. Other species had learned to work within the limits the Dominion allowed. Those who resisted had been conquered or destroyed. When the human delegation requested permission to address the assembly, the chamber erupted in argument. The Koroth representatives were furious. They called humans dangerous animals who had attacked their rightful masters. They demanded that the assembly condemn Earth and authorize a full military response. They warned that showing weakness would encourage rebellion among other conquered peoples. Other species were less certain. They had watched the humans defeat Koroth fleets against impossible odds. They had heard the reports from the Coalition, the alliance of forgotten and dismissed species that had formed around humanity. They wondered if the balance of power they had accepted for so long was about to change. The vote was close, but it passed. Humanity would be allowed to speak. Samuel Grant walked to the central platform and looked up at the assembled representatives. There were hundreds of them, from dozens of species, watching him with eyes and sensors and organs he could not identify. Most of them had never seen a human before. Most of them had dismissed his species as irrelevant until very recently he had prepared a speech. Patricia and Lisa and Daniel had helped him write it, spending weeks choosing every word. But standing there, looking at the gathered powers of the galaxy, Samuel decided to speak from his heart instead. He told them about Denver. He described the city as it had been before the invasion. The mountains in the distance, the streets filled with people going about their ordinary lives, the coffee shops and schools and parks, the families who had lived there for generations. Then he described what remained. The crater. The silence. 800 million people died in the first week of the Koroth invasion, Samuel said. His voice was steady, but pain filled every word. They burned our cities and killed our children. They told us we were nothing more than useful animals, beneath their concern, unworthy of basic dignity. They thought we would accept this. They thought we would give up. He paused and looked directly at the Korath representatives. They stared back at him with undisguised hatred. "We did not give up," Samuel continued. "We could not. When you take everything from a people, when you destroy their homes and murder their families and tell them they are worthless, you leave them with nothing to lose. And people with nothing to lose are capable of anything." He spoke about the resistance, about Patricia, who had built a spy network while pretending to sort through garbage, about Daniel, who had invented faster-than-light travel in a cave, about Lisa, who had hidden for 7 years waiting for the chance to fight again, about the millions of humans who had worked in secret, risking their lives every day, refusing to accept that their species had reached its end. "But we did not win alone," Samuel said. "We had help. From the Threll, whose world was destroyed by the same empire that attacked ours, from the Ven, who showed us that slavery does not have to be permanent, from the Calyx, who gave us the information we needed to survive. We are not here to represent only humanity. We are here to speak for all the species that the great powers have overlooked, exploited, or dismissed." The chamber was silent. The representatives were listening in a way they rarely did. Samuel told them about the coalition. 17 species had joined in the months after the second battle. More were asking to join every day. They were not the strongest or the richest or the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy. They were the ones who had been told they did not matter. "We are building something new," Samuel said. "Not an empire, not a hierarchy where the powerful rule the weak. A partnership of equals, where every species has a voice, where no one is dismissed because they lack technology or military strength. The old way of doing things, where might makes right and the conquered must accept their fate, is ending. A new way is beginning." He looked around the chamber one more time. "You can join us," he said simply. "You can oppose us. You can ignore us. But you cannot stop us. We have learned something in the fire of our suffering that the great powers have forgotten. We have learned that the measure of a people is not their strength at their highest moment. It is their courage at their lowest. Humanity was broken. We were conquered. We lost everything, and we rose anyway. That is who we are. That is what we offer the galaxy. The knowledge that defeat is not the end. That hope survives when everything else is lost. That the forgotten and the dismissed can become the force that changes everything. Earth speaks with a new voice now, and we will keep speaking until every being in this galaxy knows that they matter, that they have worth, that they deserve a place among the stars." The assembly was silent for a long moment after Samuel finished. Then, slowly, representatives began to applaud. Not all of them. The Korath sat in furious silence. Some of their allies refused to acknowledge what they had heard, but others were clapping, from species that had never been asked their opinion, from delegations that had accepted their lesser status for so long, they had forgotten to question it. The human delegation departed without waiting for a formal response. They did not need permission from the old powers. They were creating something new. Within a year, 60 species had joined the coalition. Within a decade, it had become the largest alliance in galactic history. The Korath Dominion, weakened by military defeat and plagued by rebellions among their subject peoples, began to collapse. The empire that had terrorized the galaxy for 300 years crumbled under the weight of its own cruelty. Earth rebuilt. The scars of the invasion remained, turned into memorials for those who had been lost. New cities rose where old ones had burned. Children grew up hearing stories of the occupation and the uprising, of the heroes who had refused to surrender when surrender seemed like the only option. Patricia Dawson served as Earth's first representative to the Coalition Council. She spent her remaining years helping other species achieve what humanity had achieved, teaching them that resistance was possible, that hope was never truly lost. Daniel Kim built the first human shipyards beyond the solar system. His spite drive technology spread across the galaxy, modified and improved by 100 different species, opening paths to stars that had seemed unreachable. Lisa Hartwell commanded the coalition fleet that finally accepted the Korath surrender. She looked at the alien representatives who had once called her species useful animals, and she felt no satisfaction in their defeat. Only exhaustion and a quiet hope that her children would never know what it meant to be conquered. Samuel Grant retired to a small house in the mountains of Colorado, not far from where Denver had once stood. He wrote his memoirs there, documenting everything that had happened, making sure the galaxy would never forget. His book became required reading for every species that joined the coalition, a reminder of what was possible when people refused to give up. On the last page, he wrote a simple message: we were not supposed to survive. Every calculation said we would fail. Every expert said we should surrender. Every reasonable assessment of our situation pointed toward extinction. But we did not care about calculations or experts or reasonable assessments. We cared about each other. We cared about our home. We cared about proving that the measure of a people is not what happens to them, but what they choose to do in response. The universe had tried to silence us. We chose to speak. Anyway, and the galaxy will never be the same.